My name is Andrew Richards. I'll do an intro of myself in a minute. I have Stephanie Forbes, very knowledgeable. I'm going to take all her great experience and try to whittle it down because she's very knowledgeable. We're going to try to keep this a bit informal, so if for whatever reason you have a question, you can ask it. If we get too bogged down in questions, then we'll push it off to the end. But I strongly recommend that you write down questions because this session is for you. We want you to get something out of it, not just sitting here and listening to us, but ask good questions, ask leading questions. There are no dumb questions. A bit about myself. My name is Andrew Richards. I am a senior HSE, Health, Safety, Environmental lead for Canada. I work for Seabury, have 25 plus years of experience. I initially started as a health and safety coordinator. Anyways, I was asked, hey, do you want to do environmental? Sure, why not? A little bit later on, do you want to do sustainability? Sure, why not? And it kind of leads me to believe, or what was said yesterday, we really have to be flexible with things changing, and we don't know what tomorrow brings, but hopefully with this session we'll give you some really good information for whatever to come. Some fun facts about me, quickly. I like to snorkel. I like to do freestyle dancing. And I have a weird hobby of collecting hotel bar soaps. Every hotel I go to, I pick up a hotel bar soap. I don't use it, so I've got all the soap at home, which is not good from a sustainability point of view. So let me just go to introduce Stephanie. I'm going to have to read this because she has so much good stuff.
Hopefully he shortens it.
You know what, I try my best. I'm not going to do you justice, but I'll try. Stephanie Forbes, ta-da! is a nationally recognized value chain expert with nearly 25 years of experience, great proactive experience, during multi-billion-dollar projects across Canada and the US. She leads the Forbes Group, a full-service construction consulting focusing on the value chain, sustainability, government best practices, reporting, and business optimization. She has, I'm not going to read over her project, but billion-dollar projects, Syncrude, LBN, TC Energy, etc. Again, I can't justify all that she's done. Let me just go to some fun things about Stephanie. She loves to spend time in the kitchen. On the ski hills, which I just found out today, what did you call that? Was the fresh snow, it's...
champagne powder, you know, when it's light and fluffy and it floats over your shoulders?
So if you can get a chance to go skiing tonight, hey, or tomorrow, why not? It's fresh snow. And I have this one. She likes to spend time in the barn.
I do. I love riding horses.
Oh my goodness. I want to just change the subject here because I grew up on a farm with horses, but we could take that offline.
Might have to.
Alrighty. So we're going to first start with, let me see if I can move this forward. That's our barcode. That's what we're doing here. Stephanie on my right and myself. Okay, let's go. That's my barcode for LinkedIn. Quickly, Stephanie. We're going to do a question, but before we do the question, just think about that. I'm going to ask Stephanie a question, and I'm going to come to that. Bless you. Stephanie, how do organizations navigate the trade-off between achieving sustainability goals and maintaining operational efficiencies in the new supply chains?
That's a great question, Andrew. So we're seeing a lot of rhetoric around operational effectiveness and efficiency and how it sometimes butts up against sustainability. True sustainability is profitable from a business perspective. And it's about aligning those objectives together and working with your sustainable objectives and your operational objectives and figuring out where the sweet spot is. There's actually a really interesting company out of the UK that takes all the scraps from the Savile Row tailors and reweaves it and respins it and makes an entirely new set of clothing from these offcuts from Savile Row, creating another major business all from waste products. And it serves part of a continuous cycle of repurposing and renewed efforts. And so when you take that from the clothing industry, which historically is really quite unsustainable with a ton of waste, and you see them starting to create circular economies around clothing that are very profitable. I know that there is a way in other industries to marry sustainable objectives with operational effectiveness, efficiency, and goals, and create a better outcome for organizations.
Well said, I like that. And maybe this will lead me to my first question. If you can, look at the question, what is your biggest concern for supply chains in 2025?
Yeah, so are they able to do the poll?
I believe we are. Oh wait, I don't see the QR code here.
Is there, for the Slido poll?
There we go. Thank you.
Don't you love technology?
You know, it's funny, while they answered that question, I was having breakfast with somebody today, and the technology had changed so quickly when we talk about AI. And when I first started my career, you'd ask a question and people would have to write it down on a piece of paper. You know, they send up the cards and you'd read off it. Here, in a matter of seconds, we're going to get an answer. Hopefully we're going to get an answer. It will pop up soon.
Yeah, just give everyone a couple more minutes.
But yeah, technology is definitely going quickly. And one of the questions will be to deal with technology and how it's affecting us.
From a sustainability perspective, I think it'll be a really good segue after this, after we get this poll. Just give it a couple more seconds. There's still people. Yeah.
Okay, I see a lot of Trumps here.
Really good. Yeah, I think I know. There's a theme, right? There's definitely a theme. So when we take a look at your questions, right? So when we think about the biggest issues, right, that are impacting us in 2025, of course, Trump comes top of mind, and the threat of tariffs, imposing tariffs against Canada. But right on the heels of that, we have the interprovincial roadblocks. So the tariffs that we have between provinces account for about 21% of our cost of living. So we really need to figure out how our premiers can work together and open up trade just between provinces, let alone trade between other countries. So, those two things are probably number 1 and 2. So if Trump imposes a 25% tariff, that's pretty simple math. But if we could just get rid of the 21% that we have interprovincially, that would be a huge benefit. I think I saw interdependence and dependence in there. We also have to figure out a way to trade with other countries. Our ESG, our Scope 3, and our philosophies around sustainability closely align with the EU, Australia, and Japan. And if we can figure out ways to trade with those countries, we're going to be aligned philosophically around sustainability objectives and targets. It's no secret that Trump has pretty much ixnayed any sort of ESG, also DE&I, and a bunch of other initiatives in the US, which is going to be problematic in terms of enforcing any sort of compliance and reporting out of US entities. That has a significant trickle-down effect to our Canadian corporations. There's a large number of Canadian corporations that are US owned. And so if the US parent is not required to, the likelihood of subsidiaries that are located in Canada will become less and less and less. And then the reporting will be perfunctory, which means it won't really tell you a lot. It'll meet the minimum requirements, and it may not pass an audit. And that's not super helpful in moving us forward. So based on where I've seen where you guys are at, I think that a lot of those big issues around how do we move to a more sustainable space and place means that we have, as Canada and as Canadians, really need to decide how we want to move forward in 25, whether that's between our interprovincial trade barriers or trading with countries that share our similar values around sustainability. And I think we're seeing a shift over to that in the current day rhetoric around really trying hard to figure out how we're going to make the things that we value work.
I like that. That's a good answer, Stephanie. I'm going to dial back for a second. I saw a common thread here, and I'll just put in my little hamster way of saying it. Uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty going on right now. You talked about the tariffs. I mean, anyone who watches the news, it's, tariffs. You talked about changing regulations, which Most of, I think, in this room probably in one way or another have to deal with regulations. But there's also other uncertainties. You talk about interprovincial trade, uncertainty where a lot of us are probably connected with US-based companies or even across the pond, or we have clients that are heavily invested into the United States or otherwise. Uncertainty. We can also look at AI, which we'll talk about in a bit. But my question is, uncertainty in general, how would you suggest this group deal with the constant change, which is only going to increase, and for uncertainty, as it relates to the topic, but in general as well?
Really good question. So we really need to build resilience and redundancy, and I talk about this a lot, whether that's within your supply chain, within your organization, or just you as an individual. We need to figure out how we are going to build, in this case, sustainable supply chains. How are we going to build them? What do they look like? What type of people do we want to do business with to create that sustainability? And how are we going to adjust maybe our metrics, our KPIs, maybe even our budgets to create a resilient model? A resilient model means that you have more than one supplier. It means that you care very much from a geographical, I'm having a hard time with my words this morning. You look at your geography, where are you getting your stuff from? Is it the DRC? Is it Mexico? Is it Chile? Like, where are you getting that product that you so desperately need from? And what are you doing to ensure that the product you're getting meets the conditions that you think are appropriate, not just from a sustainability perspective, but from a modern slavery perspective? So you have a lot of considerations as you take a look at your resiliency and the depth and breadth of which you've gone out to secure that resiliency. That could include developing local nearshoring, it could be developing local manufacturing, or working with local providers and producers to make sure that you always have a contingency plan. Then so resiliency and redundancy kind of go hand in hand. That resilient model and that resilient mindset means that you're always anticipating for something to go wrong. And all of us in supply chain have literally like A through F is our base level plan. Like, we always are planning. Something's gonna break, a boat's gonna get stuck, some shipment's gonna not have the right paperwork, someone's gonna blow something up, there's gonna be a port strike, like, just you name it. There's gonna be no trucks, or the truck drivers are on strike. There's just always something that's gonna sort of fall within that thing that's going to disrupt you. So we always work from a like plan A through F type of perspective. So going back to, it's very dynamic. We got a lot of dynamic change. It's going to continue for quite some time. I would imagine that we have a solid 4 years of constant change. And that's not to mention that we have perhaps 3 prime ministers this year in Canada alone, which is also problematic because that means that we don't actually have federal leadership that can actually say, these are our sustainability targets. This is the clarification you need on this regulation. This is our method and mindset as we approach not just our US relationships, but our relationships across the pond, to your point, and to other regions within the world.
Okay, and I like that answer. What I got from that, and it was a really good answer, it's continue to search out potential solutions. So I think you have a plug for ECO in this conference. There's going to be uncertainty, as we can see in the questions. Are we going to have all the answers? I don't think so. We have tools like AI, and there's a presentation, yet there are multiple presentations. Coming to these type of conferences and asking questions, Stephanie Forbes, SME subject matter expert on the topic. Others, I don't know what tomorrow's question or concern is going to be, but we cannot operate in a vacuum. You really have to get out there and talk to people. Ask questions. There are no dumb questions. It's better that you ask a question that you think is dumb, ask for help, support, what have you, hire consultants, which I'm a big proponent on, than to sit there and take a guess and not know. Uncertainty is, I think it's the common. It's not changing well, the question will change, but you always can have uncertainty. But to wrap it up, you need to reach out. You need to ask for help. Go to conferences. Get peers, get networks, what have you. Mm-hmm. As the world changes, we cannot rely on the old tools. We cannot, and there's no slight to my university days, we can't go back to a textbook and think we're going to get the answer. Yep. Things are changing so quickly. Probably a textbook that was written 5 years ago chances are at least 20% of it's outdated, and I'm being generous with my numbers. So let's move on to the next question, unless you want to add something to that, Stephanie.
No, I think you actually provided us a great segue. So when we talk about AI and uncertainty and reaching out to your networks, it's really important because we all know AI is fantastic, but it's not always right.
Yeah.
And if we're using AI to write our ESG reports and we're using other types of technology to kind of fill in the blanks, and we don't have a robust audit and verification process or checking process or peer-reviewed process, we might be producing things that aren't necessarily 100%.
I like that. That's a very good question. And I don't know if that's like a good segue. I think someone got a little ahead here. I see an answer for that question in regard to greenwashing. But before we go to that, I just wanted to ask you a question because I think it's the elephant, or no, what did I see? The buffalo in the room.
Buffalo,
yes.
yes.
The buffalo, like, very nice, or the beaver in the room. The question would be, with the rise of regulations like Bill C-59, increasing focus on Scope 3 emissions, what strategy would you recommend to business looking to align with these frameworks while avoiding greenwashing pitfalls?
That's a really good question. So the problem that we have with Bill C-59 is it doesn't actually align with other reporting templates. So I'm just going to pick on greenhouse gas Scope 3 protocol. So if I follow the greenhouse gas Scope 3 protocol and it tells me to use an estimate or an industry average to do my calculations, C-59 says you can't do that. So you have, and that's a really super generalization. So you have a mismatch in terms of what C-59 tells you can and cannot do and what Scope 3 says is acceptable. And so what you have, and I'm sure we've seen it especially here in Calgary, is they've been advised by their KPMG or their M&P or whoever just to take it down for now. Because if you do it wrong, then you end up in front of the Competition Bureau, because now you're spreading false advertising and you are in fact doing greenwashing. If the Competition Bureau views what you've done is marketing and or is not robust enough to meet the specifics of C-59. I have a lot of individuals that I've spoken with about this whole C-59 impact, and it is very concerning for a lot of them. There are a few organizations that have gone, okay, this is what we're going to do. These are our disclaimers we're going to put in. We're going to have it audited. We're going to do all these things. But that's few of them. And then judging by the answers that we have on the poll here, I would say that exact answer that we have up on the screen is the reason why we don't have a lot of ESG reports coming out since C-59 went out, because a lot of them are viewed to have falsified information. There's been a number of reports that some of the large, I think it's IBCCA, I have the acronym wrong, but there's a very large environmental report that came out that's been viewed as not having quite 100% the right information in it. And there's a variety of other reports that are coming out. There are these huge global reports coming out of major institutions, such as, I'm trying to remember the name. You know when you have that moment in the morning when your brain just evaporates a thought and now it's in the ether somewhere? It'll come back to me. It'll be when I'm all done, and so you guys can find me at the back of the room and then I'll finally have the answer. But we've got a lot of major reports that are not accurate. We've got AI being used for reporting. We've got unaudited reports that are being published. And so that's contributing to this greenwashing phenomenon. And you guys are the most sustainable, environmentally friendly group that I've spoken to in a really long time. And to have 80-some% of you guys say that you believe most ESG reporting contains greenwashing is pretty telling that we have a problem with ESG reporting. So we either have to figure out how we're going to report it, or we have to do something different, because continuing to report things that people view as false doesn't move the needle in terms of sustainability. It only detracts from its value. And then you have people saying, well, that's sustainability stuff, that's all garbage and nonsense and marketing. And so we've got to find a way to bridge that gap and use sustainability as the catalyst to move operational effectiveness and efficiency forward, and use it as a governance tool and a bunch of other stuff to move the industry forward.
Yeah. So great answer, Stephanie. So I'm going to do low tech here because I know we already have the answer. Quick show of hands who does not know what greenwashing really means, the definition, open and honest communication. Is anyone here that's not clear on that? Okay, we're being honest.
Smart crowd.
Smart crowd or everyone being shy? Pardon me?
We just Google it, he said.
There we go. And that's great. And the reason why I asked that question because we come up with these terms, and depending on where you are in your career, you may think it's one thing, but definitely did a great job explaining it. And I'll put in my little hamster way of saying it. You're making everything seem, it's heaven, basically, everything perfect. But my question back to you, Stephanie, is how source of truth? So you talked about putting stuff in the report that are not factual. What would you recommend as your source of truth? How do you document that? Where do you contain that information? What am I asking? Does it make any sense?
So that's really tough, right? So the problem that we have is that we're trying to take aggregate industry information and distill it down to the individual user. So anytime you're doing, I call it like reverse mathematics. I'm not a math person, but it's like you're taking a big thing and then you're trying to like distill it down into a little thing and then extrapolate information based on that, right? Because we're saying, I don't know exactly how much carbon emissions these are creating, but I'm going to use my estimate based on the average gigawatt hour, and the average gigawatt hour does this. And so when we get down into sort of the fineness of like, what does my facility actually do and use and everything, if you have really robust instrumentation, right? So it tells you exactly, what the item is, for how long it was running, with the amount of heat, with the amount of like all the things, because you've got all that data. Then you have nice, robust data. But there's not a lot of facilities that have that level of data that's being collected off of their facilities. It's usually more of this was my electric bill, this was my average, this was, I think it was 1,500 kilometers on the vehicle. And so we're taking a lot of averages, and then we're trying to distill that down into something really concrete. I think some of the protocols would be better if they allowed for, and I'm going to use this hopefully not to get booed out of the room, but if you used a little bit more of a generality and say, this is our current estimate of what we do. This is our current estimate of what we're trying to reduce by. And these are the ways that we're trying to calculate it. Makes it easier for organizations to do, and B, allows greater transparency around what it is that you're calculating off of and how you're coming up to those conclusions. When we try to get really exact at this place and stage, it's really hard because we actually don't necessarily have all the data to be really exact on. And so then you have like those little plus minuses, assumption columns that take up 3 pages in a report. And that really throws people off because it's not really helpful. And so when we think of our ESG and sustainability reporting, how are we being helpful? How are we demonstrating a reduction? How are we demonstrating the good that we're doing? How are we demonstrating what direction we're moving and our thoughts and our processes, as opposed to like this fine little piece of data that we actually can't really explain everything in because we have all these assumptions and asterisks on the side. So I think it's moving to a little bit more of a simplistic reporting model with a lot more transparency and less reliance on exact figures, because those exact figures are contributing to, I think, why we're seeing such greenwashing. Wow, I need another coffee. Stats that we're seeing, because like we're not seeing any reliability in the reporting. So we fundamentally need to shift. We fundamentally need to do something different with how we're going to communicate that information so that it can be viewed as valuable, correct, authentic, and usable.
Okay, and that's a good segue to the next question related to greenwashing. So I think again, when we see what's happening in the United States with their changes with the new leadership and questioning the whole value of ESG reporting. Yeah. So how do we as professionals who are putting forward ESG reports justify doing this, whereas a bigger trading partner is saying, what the value in it? Say your manager comes and says, why are we doing this? What's the value for it? How do we justify continue doing this?
Oh, that's a really hard question. It's a really good question, Andrew. It's really challenging. Right? When we look at our largest trading partner completely devaluing everything related to sustainability and creating executive orders around not requiring it, it creates a huge impact for us. It means we can do it, but a lot of our organizations here are US owned, which means that you're going to see reductions in budget for reporting purposes, because if it's no longer required and is not a mandate, they're just going to say, well, this is an expense we don't need. So it's a really big concern. It's a huge concern. And I don't think it's one that we can answer in 3 minutes. I think it's one that we need to take a really hard look at and go, how are we going to make sustainability part of operational excellence so that we can move our companies forward in the best way that we know how, and still maintaining rigor so that when we do develop trading relationships with, for example, the EU or Australia on a more robust level, hopefully that comes, that we are prepared and we're ready and we have the appropriate reporting to be able to do that. But right now, we're in a bit of a quagmire and we don't have a lot of direction federally around what's going to happen with some of our bills, such as C-59. We've heard rumors that different leaders might roll back certain portions and or all of C-59. So that might change then how we report and what we do, and maybe lean us or push us more towards maybe like a scope 3 in ESG in terms of reporting and mandates. But it's a really difficult question, and I would encourage each of you to look at your organizations and figure out how are you going to help navigate this uncertainty into creating the sustainable mandate as part of an operational effectiveness and efficiency that drives results. And I think that's the big piece that I think the gap in certain rhetoric is that sustainability does actually drive good results, and it's about tying those two things together when it comes to your goals and your KPIs and figuring out that sweet spot.
Yeah. And I like this answer, and my apologies, I know we can't get this answer in 3 minutes, but I asked that question.
That's a good question.
Oh, thank you. I asked that question for a reason, because if your manager has not, she or he has not come and asked you this, chances are they may come and ask you eventually, what is the value for this? So maybe another plug to ECO, maybe next year we can have a session on it, because I think the Stephanie point, you really need to take a hard look and ask, how can we justify this program? How does it tie into a profit and loss statement? Mm-hmm. If it's perceived that there's no value, I think there's value in it. Let me be honest. We are going to have to answer this question. So maybe a homework assignment for yourselves to start thinking about it and how you're going to answer it. I see, wow, this question here is, every thumbs up to you. You're very efficient. I like that. Let me ask the question first before, definitely a question first before we go to this poll, if that's okay. And I'm going to be mindful of time. We got about 20 minutes left, so we're doing pretty good with time. And I want to also thank you, because SME, subject expert, open and honest communication, really good answers. And I'm not just saying that because, one, I just met her today, but really good answers.
Thank you, Andrew.
No problem. Question, with intermodal transportation accounting for 80% of consumer goods movement, what strategies are critical for balancing efficiency, transparency, and resilience in global supply chains?
Oh, that's a good one. So, 80% of our intermodal transportation, or 80% of our consumer goods, so everything from your food and vegetables to medicine to electronic goods, appliances, all travel in those 20 and 40-foot sea cans. I read a stat somewhere that roughly one good moves through 8 different countries before it reaches its landed destination. So that's including all of the component parts and materials. So the average item, so if my cell phone goes through 8 countries before I get it. So those are some pretty big stats. So when we think about those cargo ships and we think about trucks and we think about all of the different ways that intermodal moves, intermodal is really not friendly. It's super not friendly in terms of a sustainability model. One of the key objectives there, and you'll hear a lot of this rhetoric from a political standpoint, is how are we either nearshoring or bringing back in to a nation's capacity certain critical elements. Everyone remember the pandemic? Or are we trying to repress that? I'm still kind of repressing it. So during the pandemic, right, we couldn't get certain components. We couldn't get certain vaccinations. We actually didn't have a facility that could mass produce vaccinations sufficient for Canada's populations. We didn't have sufficient PPE. We didn't have sufficient, a whole bunch of things. And all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, what happened? Well, we outsourced everything because somebody did a bid tab and they went to the lowest cost outcome for each item and saved 13 cents or 12 cents a unit. And so now what we're seeing is those fantastic savings mean absolutely nothing when you're in the middle of a global crisis and you can't actually source anything that you actually need to A, protect your population, or B, get over something that's really hard. So we're seeing a ton of that. We're seeing, facilities to create injectables for people, whether that's people or animals. Those are all coming back in, whether it's in Mexico, the US, Canada. We're seeing tons of onshore manufacturing open up. We're seeing tons of new medical technologies opening up within Canada as best they can, because there's this huge gap. And so we actually really need to think about, when you're participating in a technical evaluation on a good or even service that you're sourcing for your organization, are we really making a good decision? It's going to come back to that redundancy and resilience that we talked about at the beginning of the session. If we're trying to save 13 cents, but we have zero bandwidth if something comes wrong, we're actually not saving money. We have to think of our average worst case scenario. That there's a port strike, we can't land anything for 3 months. There's a rail strike, we can't move anything for, a week, right? So you have all these considerations to take into account when you're looking at your products and your services. And that's, the medical side is just one aspect. We've got the food side. A large number of our food, comes through intermodal. If you look at the grocery store and you look at your garlic from China, you look at your bananas from Peru, you look at all of these things, they don't just magically appear. They have to go into a container and get shipped up, most of it by truck, but some of it will come, out through an inland port. So it'll go through Vancouver and then truck over. So really take a look at those things that you're buying and take a look at the things that you're doing and figure out, am I doing something that's going to work out in the long run? We have to, as Canadians, reduce our reliance on exports moving intermodally through our country. It's really problematic in terms of our ability to navigate. And I would encourage you to look at that next time you're buying something, sourcing something. Even personally, I always look to see where my bananas come from, and I never buy Chinese garlic. Because you know how long it takes to get there from here? It's a month that it sits in the container. And then it was harvested probably a month before that and then put in its container. And they probably use some sort of chemical to preserve it in those containers. So by the time I get it, it's not only old, but it's been exposed to a lot of chemicals that I don't necessarily want. And so that's just me personally, but when I look at that, I don't think that's truly a sustainable methodology.
And I like this answer because it relates to a real life situation. We all shop, use the garlic as an example. It may be cheaper, but then you have to look at, how did it get here? What are the ramifications? But when we go to the audience Q&A, I know it's about 25% of the respondents say they would not pay more for ethically sourced products. And I would like to know why. And maybe the question before that is, or to add to that would be, how much more would you be willing to pay? So if it's 1% more, yeah, I'm all on board. I'll pay that extra percent to get something that's ethically sourced, what have you. Is it 10? Yeah, maybe. Is it 25? Is it 50? Etc. So maybe that's a question that we should be asking ourselves to what level, because always there's a cost to doing everything. So I know we're getting, go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to just touch on AI and the cobalt.
That's exactly
We're
where I
reading
wanna go.
each other's minds right now. We have a little, can you see it from there? What color is it?
It's not me. I got my little AI on my phone here and it's just putting it to my brain here. Great segue, because AI, it's that buffalo in a room. Great example with batteries. Stephanie, do you want to speak to that point in regard to?
Yeah, so we're all really excited about AI, right? AI and blockchain, machine learning is going to save all of us, right? It's going to be the thing, right? And so then we're looking that up on our laptop, or we're looking that up on our cell phone, which all contain a bazillion rare earth minerals. A large portion of our rare earth minerals, specifically coltan and cobalt, come out of the DRC. So the DRC has hundreds of thousands of people participating in what I call artisanal mining. I didn't actually make up that term, somebody else did. So that's, like right out of Lord of the Rings, right? Like pickaxe, like shovel. They carry out, dirt and rocks on their head up these, bamboo ladders to then be loaded onto, a truck of some kind and then transported off to be further refined. And so I read this article and they're like, oh, we're just going to use blockchain for our rare earth minerals. So please tell me how we're going to use blockchain in an artisanal mine with people with pickaxes and shovels. That's analog. There's no one's going to save you from artisanal mining and modern slavery in any of the DRC operations. All of those items then get trucked off and blended in with other stockpiles from other locations and then further refined. So you actually have no idea how much cobalt or coltrane, or pick the random rare earth mineral of your choice, actually came from a conflict area or was produced under slavery. We actually have no idea. But we have this huge push for electrification, for batteries, for all of this stuff, and we're not taking into account the human cost, which comes back to sustainability. We cannot continue to really push on these poor nations and poor people to deliver us our rare earth minerals so we can have our batteries and our phones. Like, that is not a sustainable practice. AI and blockchain and ML will not save you from poor practices and modern slavery as it relates to technology and sustainability. Those things require different tools and techniques. And so when we think about all the great technology out there, there's tons of ways that we can apply that in terms of a true sustainability. If we have a lithium mine here in Canada, sure, we can tag all of the Cat D9 excavators, and we can tag the actual conveyors and everything else like that, and we can receive all that information. But when we're talking about some of these other countries and nations, whether they're at war with each other, whether they're enslaving people, we're not going to necessarily be able to do anything from a technology perspective to determine whether or not that cobalt or that coltrane came from those particular locations. So it's one of those things that nobody really wants to talk about because it's kind of uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable to think about, if I'm buying technology, some of it could have come from these crazy slavery operations in the DRC. When I buy clothing, same thing. Where is it coming from? Do they have ethical practices? You can't RFID, your t-shirt from Zara out of Sri Lanka. Like, that doesn't work. So we need to really think about, when we're truly talking about sustainability in all aspects, including our rare earth minerals, how are we going to apply where appropriate technology? Or in other instances, what other tools do we need to use? Does that look like policy? Does that look like government intervention? What does that look like for you? You can't just hop on a plane, head down to the DRC and go, oh, we're going to do an inspection of your cobalt facility. We'd like to make sure all this stuff comes from the up and up, right? You don't even get access. So these are some considerations that I'd like you to take away with when we talk about true sustainability and how it's going to impact us moving forward, especially with technology.
And it's a great tie-in with our topic here. We're talking about complexity of supply chains, but it's an everyday example. I mean, I don't know how many people have an electric car, but I think everyone in here has a phone. We can look at it like, hey, in Canada, this is great. It's all clean, but to Stephanie's point, you have to look, all the way down to where it was sourced. Additionally, with the great tie-in of AI can't accommodate or do the calculation for things that are done manually. It's a really good example. That's one of many examples that we should be asking ourselves, where did this thing start out and what's the overall effect, and not just look at it from a Canadian perspective. Mm-hmm. So I think Stephanie and myself have been talking a lot. Again, Stephanie, SME, subject matter expert. Great answers. But now I want to throw it out to the floor here and into some time. We will be around if you have questions afterwards, but we want to be respectful at one time. Are there any questions that you, the audience, want to ask? I would recommend. There we go, a keen area. Thank you.
So jumping back to a little bit earlier in your discussion around C59 and the extension of that. having been working on these files for a few decades.
Long time.
It shows, eh?
Still looking great, by the way. You're fine.
Oh,
Yeah,
excellent.
it's good,
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I need that. The issues haven't changed. You know, I was in the, I poked my head in the remediation workshop 30 years ago. Grant Trump and I, Grant started ECO. We ran a bioremediation workshop because we were trying to understand those things, and there was a lot of people who wanted to do the same thing. So, just a simple example. The policies, political-driven policies with respect to accountability, greenhouse accountability, accounting, reporting, ebb and flow.
Yes.
Where we're seeing the drivers now that are independent of the political machinations are coming out of the finance and accounting side. So CGSB, IFRS, and they're independent.
Yep.
I think there's some pros and cons with that.
Yep.
Can you comment on that? I mean, we've got many of those are, well, and to both of you, you know, you're in the real estate side. We're talking M&As. I mean, a lot of it's driven by due diligence and contingent liabilities on your acquisitions. I've been involved with those, and it can be really difficult to understand what those contingent liabilities are, and if they're not reported, and if they're not communicated, and they're well hidden, Reed and Ron WorldCom, you know, there's a reason we had Sarbanes-Oxley a couple of decades ago.
100%. 100%. Really good points. So we do have the rise. So IFRS S1 and S2 most predominantly speaks to like how you do your calculations, and they are, as to your point, very financial in nature. They are a really good stepping stone. The IFRS is a really good stepping stone, sort of in the middle. It's still a bit of a challenge in terms of people understanding how they're supposed to do the work. So I think back to my first job. I had a checklist. I had, here's the first step, here's the second step, here's the third step, and then it would have the example, and then, because it was all binders back in the day, you'd have examples of whatever it was, the thing that you were supposed to fill out or do. When I look at some of the instructions that come out of whether it's GHG Scope 3, IFRS, S1, S2, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So for the average team, so if I'm a team of 4 or 5 and I'm responsible for putting together all the things that bundle up into my S1 and S2, it's hard to figure out exactly what you're supposed to do and collect because it's specific to your organization, whether or not you can find the data. Is the data available? Is it robust? Does anyone fact check the data? You're pulling something out of your ERP. I don't know if anyone's experienced trying to pull out data from an ERP and then trying to rely on it. It's challenging.
Fiction?
What's that?
Fiction?
It can be a little fictional. So it becomes really difficult because you're supposed to pull data, but you can't trust the data that you're pulling from your ERP. You're not 100% sure how you're supposed to calculate it, and there's sort of no checklist to go by. So it becomes a challenge to meet those compliance requirements. I do think IFRS S1, S2 is probably the closest of any of them that I've seen in terms of being helpful, but that's still finance, like it's still very accounting driven. It's still very much a sort of a CPA mindset. And the problem there again is when you're pulling data out of an ERP, that isn't 100%. It doesn't matter how many degrees in mathematics you have, your data set that you're starting with is wrong.
We need more management accountants involved in the process, not just CAs.
I agree. I think that there needs to be a different mindset approach to how you're going to do the thing, establish robust rules, assumptions, reporting guidelines, and then move forward from there. But people don't necessarily want to put a stake in the sand and say, these are our assumptions, these are our rules, this is what we're following, this is our thing, and drill it down. Because that stake in the sand can be viewed as wrong, right? And sometimes we don't want to be wrong, especially when we're talking about an IFRS reporting guideline.
Great. Thank you. We have we got a
Lots.
lot of questions, so why don't we just try with this lady in the blue? Yeah, please.
Hi there. I had a question and then a comment. Just thinking about the concept of business continuity, and you were talking about COVID and supply chain. is it, I know a lot of people, that is a confidential document, like business continuity,
Yeah.
but do you think when we're putting out our bids, we could be talking to our suppliers, because a lot of us don't always deal with the direct manufacturer, about what are they doing with respect, like even if they can't share it, like what, have you identified your vulnerabilities? What are you doing about them? Just kind of like you said, you have 3 sources. And are there any tools that you've come across that sort of help organizations do their supply chain vulnerability assessments? And you could put questions in there, obviously what you just said about slavery and sources, et cetera. And kind of added on to that, is there tools that really help people who don't understand? Here are the top types of products, materials that you need to think about, because we sure know them with fair trade. Like I work for the city, we've identified them, but for these things, are there good sources of information to say, these are the things you should really be paying attention to when you're going to supply?
So that's a great question, and I'm going to abbreviate my answer because I want to get to the other 2 before they pull the plug. So there is a ton of business continuity templates, tools, and ways that you can do that. I can chat with you after about ways to find some of that stuff. You should always, in your organization, have a business continuity plan or emergency response plan. So as Calgary, we did a ton after everything flooded in, I think, 13. We did a ton of stuff after COVID, and we continued, most organizations continue to do business continuity planning. With your suppliers, yes, you should be asking them, do you have a business continuity plan? How have you addressed the following issues? And, for example, if you're buying some batteries, how have you addressed the issues of rare earth minerals, of, transportation issues? And you can ask them 3 or 4 questions in the bid that are easy things for them to be able to answer, and then you can drill down more with your successful proponent.
Thank you, Deputy.
I think there's 2 over on the other side there.
Hi, thanks for the interesting conversation. My name is Nnamdi Chadikobi. So I want to circle back to the last question you asked on the slide, though. You said, would you be willing to pay more for a product if you know it was sourced ethically? We have a bunch of environmental and sustainability practitioners here in the room. And let's be realistic, right? So sometimes sustainability can be expensive. It comes at a cost. Are we all willing to pay that cost? How many of us are willing to pay that cost? It's easy to say yes, but when faced with reality, are you able to put in your credit card and pay for that cost?
Yeah.
I was going to book a flight to West Africa, right? And then after booking the flight, they asked me if I was willing to pay for sustainable aviation fuel. $280 extra.
Yeah.
I clicked no. Because I was looking for a cheap flight to get me to my destination. I couldn't pay for it. Right? So I'm just throwing this out there, something to think about. Let's reflect on it and see. Sometimes it could be difficult for organizations as well, as it's difficult for all of us individuals. How many of us are willing to pay extra 30 or 40 grand on a Tesla vehicle or a hybrid vehicle, 15K extra? Right? We're sustainability professionals, but sometimes we cannot make these decisions. Yeah. Because it's a tough one. So think about it for organizations as well. That's not to put that out there.
That's a really good point, and that's why we have to tie sustainability to operational excellence. When we tie those 2 things together, we don't have a 25% jump in cost, right? Because sustainability is driving operational performance in and of itself, which can be done. It's about figuring out the methodology, the metric. It's about, it's like a puzzle, right? You got to kind of fit it together. Really good point. And I think we have one more.
All right, I can't hear myself. All right, I just have a question regarding to the global supply chain that you discussed earlier. So my question is how would you suggest either the public or the government keep the service, let's say the service industry or corporations responsible for outsourcing services like labor? So the particular context in the news that I read was because you mentioned that thing about the bananas, let's say, because almost everything we get, because we're like desolate, cold, dry Canada, a lot of the stuff that we're gonna get is global. is imported. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. So one of the reason I bring up labor is because I read the news where one of like the game companies I was doing a case study on, Ubisoft, actually outsourced their label and a lot of their artists and designers from Indonesia, where the labor laws are like very low, and a lot of the issues were that their employees were being overworked. There was like actually some cases of assault even, and I'm saying because service is just not tangible, it's a lot more difficult to keep the higher ups kind of accountable for it, especially when the company is, let's say, in North America and they're outsourcing all the way from Indonesia. So I want to know how because the market is so oversaturated with things that aren't like local and aren't within our borders. So how do you suggest either the government or the public could keep these companies accountable for something like that?
Excellent question. So in terms of being accountable, that's why we have S211. So S211 is the Modern Slavery Bill. So that addresses a lot of the service industry. So whether it's somebody sewing in the textile industry or providing, say, a call center service in Indonesia or India, it says that if you're going to contract those services, that you're ensuring that you're not participating in current modern slavery behaviors and actions. And depending on the size of your organization, which if you're outsourcing, I would assume that you've probably passed those thresholds, you actually have to ensure that your subcontracted agencies in Indonesia or Bangladesh or India or wherever are complying and they're meeting the minimum standards. We haven't seen any organizations yet be taken to task over that and charges laid or anything else like that for participating in modern slavery, but we're seeing it move that way. The US has I'm trying to remember their act, I can't remember, but Britain and the EU have similar modern slavery acts that are quite stringent. So there is a cutting down of those types of behaviors and organizations trying to at least ask the right questions. But it is one of due diligence and governance. So organizationally, if you're contracting overseas, you need to have a really robust due diligence and governance process. As you bring those companies on board, you need to include things such as spot checking, going in and doing audits, doing employee reviews and interviews, inspection services. All those types of things need to be part of your rigor when you go and do things with those organizations, because S211 and some of the related outcomes I've heard is they're trying to make examples of companies that are still participating in modern slavery behaviors. Good question.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, sorry, just a quick follow-up.
Sure.
I understand, because back when I still worked with the DFO, one of the biggest gaps that I found was that even though there's a lot of policy, which is not legally binding, but let's say there's law and regulation, there's definitely an enforcement gap. Do you believe that there's a gap in enforcement when it comes to stuff like this?
Yes, because of the pervasiveness with which it occurs. I think that there's a natural inference there that there's no enforcement when you see it so pervasive.
I want to thank everybody for the time. Really good questions. As you can see, we're a little over our allotted time, but I think it shows interest in the topic. Unfortunately, we can't cover everything in an hour. Definitely, can I say that? It's still around.
Yes.
You can ask questions.
I'll be around.
Myself, definitely the subject matter expert on it. What I would say the biggest takeaway on this is there's a lot of information to digest. Go out again, ask questions, get support groups, rely on the consultants, etc., so you can make informed decisions with regard to supply chain management. I want to thank you as participants because time is valuable and we really do appreciate the questions and you paying attention during this session.